Part 28. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 271. Chapter 271. The healing power is sufficient. What a beautiful thought. 3 silver stars, Greed counted them silently in his heart. The magician badge changes to a different color at level 5, 3 silver stars, 5 plus 3, and the opponent is an 8th level magician. Even if Gretel is calculated as a 4th level arcanist, approximately equal to a level 7 magician, he is still 1 level lower than his opponent. According to the common etiquette of magicians, he took the lead in bowing his head slightly and saluting the other party. The speaker also returned the salute, then half turned around, facing the clergy in the auditorium, and bowed gently. All along, the healers, servers of the god of nature, priests of the god of war, priests of the goddess of fountains, and magicians of the medical branch of the conjuration school have taken good care of our city. In the city, whether we are sick or injured, we can get treatment just by walking into the temple. In the countryside, servants of the god of nature travel across the wilderness, bringing comfort to villagers in the mountains, forests, and fields. Even poor people who are helpless and cannot afford a penny can receive free treatment. To this end, the council spends 500 gold coins per month on treatment fees and 50 gold coins on medicine fees to set up a treatment center in the port area. Let the urban poor receive free medical help. Here, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the healers. He bowed deeply again. In the auditorium, several senior clerics smiled and nodded to each other. The applause from the rows behind them, as well as the 4 rows of seats opposite Greet and behind the speaker, from low to high, from sporadic to uniform, was so enthusiastic that it almost broke the roof. A flush appeared on the magician's cheeks, his arms waved, and he continued to talk. There was a wave of applause in the conference hall, and after 3 rounds of applause, the magician bowed to all 4 sides and sat down gracefully. The applause lasted for a long time, and the clerk presiding over the meeting waited patiently for half a minute before raising the gavel and ringing the bell on the right. Master Gretel Nordmark, do you have anything to say about the necessity of establishing public health institutions? On the rostrum, the 8 jury members exchanged glances with each other. To be honest, they don't agree with the fact that the healing power is enough. Just look at the City of Glory, how they were forced to do it. However, this news is still blocked. Except for the legendary mage, only a few of them knew that the large-scale magical spell that alarmed the Magic Council was to cure the plague in the city. Little Gretel, how will you argue? Greet stood up impatiently. He adjusted his magic robe, and just as he was about to speak, his sleeves were folded, and the oak staff in his hand fell to the ground. Greet's face froze and he had to stop speaking and bent down to pick it up. There was a small burst of laughter in the auditorium. From the corner of his eye, Gretel saw the Archbishop of the God of War Temple leaning toward Elderwood, seeming to ask something in a low voice, and the 2 of them laughed together. Gretel also smiled secretly. Like the previous one, he bowed to the rostrum, the auditorium, and the speaker opposite, and then spoke calmly. Your Excellency the Archmage, distinguished healers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank all the healers for their hard work, taking care of the residents of the city for many years. Only with your dedication can this city be prosperous. Safety. In the auditorium, the Archbishop of the Temple of the God of War nodded and smiled, obviously listening very much. To his right, the High Priest of the Spring Temple looked bored. To his left, Elderwood raised his eyebrows in surprise, with words written all over his face, what evil are you holding back? Gretel looked away. He dug into his space bag and took out a thick stack of manuscript paper. Turn it over twice, pick up a pile first, and raise your voice. But I want to say that this kind of healing power is completely insufficient when dealing with emergencies. There was a commotion in the auditorium. Several high-level healers have not yet responded. Behind them, the nobles and businessmen are jostling each other, poking their heads and vying to observe the faces of the people in front of them. Gretel remained calm, turned to the rostrum, and gently pushed the manuscript paper. This is a paper I submitted to Parliament in February this year, titled On the Isolation and Treatment of Large-Scale Outbreaks of Dysentery. The paper takes the dysentery outbreak in Heartland City last July as the research object. Starting from the large-scale admission of patients in various temples, 14 were admitted on the first day, 47 on the second day, and 200 on the third day. However, with all the treatment power in the city, no more than 100 patients could be cured in one day. Name. On the rostrum, the great magician of the conjuration department waved his hand gently. The paper flew up and landed in front of him. In the flash of light, 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 4, and 4 turned into 8. The members of the jury each had a copy, and soon they reached the part that Greet was talking about, and even an extra copy was sent to the other side of the discussion table. The magician who spoke earlier quickly flipped through the pages. As he flipped through the pages, he whispered. But the plague only happens once every few years. Many times Gretel immediately picked up the topic. I'm talking about infectious diseases, that is to say, diseases that can be transmitted from person to person. Plague, cholera, dysentery, tuberculosis, diphtheria, scarlet fever, smallpox, chickenpox, leprosy. When he said a word, the other person trembled subconsciously. After saying a dozen words, the magician from the medical branch turned 7 or 8 shades darker. Gretel pulled out another stack of papers and pushed it forward. In 1163, chickenpox killed 37 people, smallpox killed 278 people, and dysentery killed 129 people. In 1165, a cholera outbreak occurred, killing 15,237 people. There was a quick commotion in the auditorium. Greet saw the Archbishop of the Ares Temple nodding while speaking to Elder Wood. Opposite, behind the magician, the sound of whispering was so loud that Greet could hear it effortlessly. Yes, there was indeed a great plague when I was a teenager. I hid in the countryside for a summer. My brother and sister died at this time. 3 people in my family died. The magician opposite looked even worse. He suddenly interrupted loudly. Where did you get this record? More than 15,000 people, did you count them one by one? The original record is the weekly death statistics of the City Hall. In the database, the past 100 years are all there, and I took the past 20 years. Gretel looked into his eyes without evading, and raised his hands high. The table inside was rotated left and right to show everyone present. Data entry and calculation are the work of the Thunder Tower Spirit. In the lower right corner of the form, there is the secret mark of the Tower Spirit, which can prove it. A beam of light flew down from the podium and landed on the lower right corner of the form. There was a thunderclap, and a lightning-like phantom flashed across the conference hall and exploded over everyone's heads. The great magician who took action nodded slightly. It is indeed the secret mark of Thunder Tower. Mr. Nordmark, please continue. Yeah. 5,000 contribution points are well spent. With Tolling's endorsement, he finally didn't have to worry about others accusing him of making a miscalculation. Thanks to Etchiao Mo for the 100 starting coins. I received the notice. It was recommended by the editor on August 9. The editor asked me to update it. I will save it today and tomorrow. I'm so worried that I can't get more subscriptions due to the big update, and the average subscription has plummeted. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 272. Greet bowed slightly to the podium to express his gratitude. Then, he took back the manuscript paper and continued reading. In 1166, dysentery, 57 deaths. Scarlet fever, 218 deaths. In 1167, dysentery, 38 people. Diphtheria, 115 people. Smallpox, 327 people. 1168. He lowered his eyes and looked at the paper. His voice had no fluctuations, almost like a mechanical sound. However, the death data one after another was still like the icy wind from the north, howling through the conference hall, making everyone feel cold all over. When Greet finished reading this page, apart from the sound of depressed and heavy breathing, there was not even a cough to be heard in the hall. Gretel put down the manuscript and picked up a new page. He looked around and saw that most of the people sitting opposite and in the auditorium began to avoid looking at him, so he raised the paper and continued reading. This is the number and proportion of various causes of death in the City Hall death records in the past 20 years. We can see that the death rate from general diseases and accidents has been relatively stable, except last year, when there was a war, there is a significant increase. However, the mortality rate of infectious diseases fluctuates greatly. The mortality rate when an infectious disease is epidemic is much higher than when it is not epidemic. Mr. Nordmark, old Sam suddenly said on the rostrum, "Draw the form in your hand on the whiteboard so that everyone can see it." He waved gently, and a large piece of whitewood board, 2 people wide and half a person tall, flew over from the wall, facing the rostrum, and floated in the air. Greet understood and simply walked out of his seat and came to the wooden board. Mage's trick flickered silently, and after a while, a table and a line chart were drawn on the whiteboard. The mortality curve, especially the upward curve when infectious diseases are prevalent, is shocking. Elderwood's face was heavy. In the temple of the god of war, the archbishop and Bishop Ampton looked at each other, their eyebrows furrowed. Behind them, a group of nobles were whispering and pointing at the whiteboard. The first one to speak, the magician from the medical branch, stared at the broken lines on the whiteboard, his eyes widened. It looked like he would send out a scorching sight or similar magic at any time, and pierce the whiteboard on the spot. Greet let them digest the data on the whiteboard for a moment. Then, he took a step forward and stood in front of the whiteboard. "I don't want to deny the role of healers. It should be said that it is the existence of healers that allows patients to receive timely treatment and prevents the number of deaths from continuing to rise. But I want to say that the plague, or the outbreak of infectious diseases, is rapidly expanding." He turned and waved. On the whiteboard, the tables and line charts disappeared instantly, and then, new lines began to leap up one by one. Take the Great Cholera of 1165 as an example. On June 2, 11 people died, on June 3, 35 people died, on the 4th, 168 people died, and on the 5th, 521 people died. In the auditorium, several high-level healers made praying gestures in unison. It was obvious that Gretel's words brought them back to that tragic year, to the grief of when they tried their best but were unable to do anything, and could only watch patients die in large numbers. Gretel's voice suddenly rose. However, this year, in the first 2 months, a cholera outbreak broke out in a village. Because of timely detection, timely treatment, and most importantly, timely cleaning of the patient's living environment and related water sources, the chain of transmission was effectively blocked. In addition to the 24 people who have already become ill, there is no more spread of cholera outside people, in villages and cities. The entire conference hall was shocked. Elderwood's steady voice followed. "Yes, I testify that this is indeed the case. Cholera broke out in that village, and I took people there to treat it. Later, no more people in this village, the surrounding areas, and the city were infected." There was another noisy discussion. The businessmen, city hall clerks, and nobles present, many of whom were not well informed, turned their heads left and right, asking each other. Greet nodded slightly to Elderwood, thanking him for coming forward to testify in time, and then looked around again. And this is the meaning of the existence of public health institutions: early detection, early treatment, early isolation, and early elimination. This is not to take away the job of the healer, but to complement the healer, provide them with early warning and reduce stress. It is a dam that blocks the flood before the catastrophe. He bowed deeply and returned to his seat. There was silence for a moment, and then, on the rostrum, a question came from the great magician of the conjuration system. Do the healers agree with Master Nordmark's statement? Approved. Opposite Gretel, the magician from the medical branch who initially spoke stood up and bowed slightly. Approved. Elderwood nodded calmly. Approved. The Archbishop of the God of War Temple followed up. Greet breathed a sigh of relief. 4 branches got 3 out of 4 votes. Basically, the overall situation has been decided. As for the one from the Spring Temple, it would be best if he agrees with it. If he doesn't agree, it shouldn't affect the overall situation. Recognition. 4 votes. Complete victory. The conference hall was buzzing. In front of the discussion table, the clerk lowered his head and made a note, and rang the bell again. Now, please let the person in charge of the Emergency Management Department make a statement. Department of Emergency Management. Greet lowered his head and began to flip through the information. The great magician mentioned to him last time, what is the view of the Emergency Management Department? Where is the corresponding information I prepared? Across the long table, to the right of the magician from the medical branch, stood a second spokesperson. This man was dressed neatly, with a tight coat, tight breeches, and a wide belt tightly tied around his waist. He looked like he was ready for battle at any time. He nodded quickly around and then began to state. Your Excellency the Archmage, distinguished healers, ladies and gentlemen. Our Emergency Management Department has full confidence in containing the plague. In 1162, the year I first joined the Emergency Management Department, we sacrificed 17 of our colleagues to annihilate an evil sect located in the sewer system of Neva City, and thwarted their plot to spread the plague. In 1168, all members of our Emergency Management Department were mobilized to set up roadblocks at the border to stop people fleeing the plague and to keep the disaster out of Nevis. In 1173, we sank a spy ship at sea and foiled an operation by the Lord of Radiance to release a plague. Even this year, we successfully arrested a group of spies from the Church of the Lord of Glory, and with the careful deployment of the Review Committee, we curbed the spread of a series of plagues such as cholera and anthrax. Huh. Gretel looked at him in surprise, then turned his head and looked at the podium. Is the Emergency Management Department so generous? Not mentioning the source of the germs leaking, not mentioning that these germs actually came out of the laboratory? Where his eyes fell, the black-robed necromancer twisted into a smile and nodded to Gretel. Greet suddenly realized, so that's it, Black Crow Swamp must have put pressure in advance. The strains he made were the same as those of the plague school, and they had to be dragged away for research. If it were revealed at this hearing that the plague came from the magician's laboratory, would that be a big deal? Although the city of Nevis is a city of magicians, it does not belong to the family of magicians. The various temples, noble families, merchants, and people must not panic on the spot. If he is a necromancer, he will also have to talk to someone from the Emergency Management Department first about what can and cannot be said at the hearing. It's great to have a big boss behind you. Thanks to Et Good Young Man Yegba for the 1,500 starting coin reward. Thanks to Et for the 100 starting coins as a reward under limited conditions. I'm saving the manuscript, and I'm waiting for the update on August 9th. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 273. Gretel and the necromancer looked at each other and looked away. The military-like speaker from the Emergency Management Department has already reached the stage of expressing determination and confidence. As Master Nordmark said, the plague he encountered in Heartland City last year, if my colleagues were here, we would have been able to kill it at the source and not let it spread to the whole city. He was full of confidence and his tone was sonorous and powerful. Gretel quickly glanced at the auditorium and saw that the face of the healer from the spring water temple was darkened and the corners of his mouth were twitching. It was obvious that he had known the inside story of the plague for a long time. Gretel was so nervous that he didn't laugh out loud. Surely it can be killed? Won't you let it go? What are you going to do? Do you want to go into the temple's dark cell? In his wild thoughts, the other party's speech has come to an end. The speaker made a fist with his right hand, knocked on his chest, and spoke in a high-pitched voice. Our department believes that as long as patrols and vigilance are strengthened, the outbreak of the plague will definitely be prevented. Please rest assured. Amid the waves of applause, Greet lowered his head deeply and raised the corners of his mouth in laughter. Gretel really couldn't help but want to laugh. This game is so easy, it's almost like giving away points. In other words, this is because the other party takes the initiative to enter a field that he is familiar with, and then lets him defeat him with his rich experience. How can you still stick to your original point of view? After I read so many death records and named so many infectious diseases, how could you still stick to your original point of view and not quickly change your attack method? It wasn't until the clerk signaled him to stand up to answer that Gretel barely suppressed his smile and stood up with a straight face. After greeting all parties as usual, he cleared his throat and fired directly at the opposite side. First of all, I would like to thank all my colleagues in the Emergency Management Department for their hard work and contributions to urban safety for decades. Secondly, I would like to ask a question. Do you think that the only source of the plague is the destruction caused by followers of the evil god and enemy spies? The other person instinctively wanted to answer and opened his mouth, but his voice was stuck in his throat. Greet picked up the manuscript paper from the previous lecture, line by line, and read it aloud again. In 1163, chickenpox killed 37 people, smallpox killed 278 people, and dysentery killed 129 people. In 1165, a cholera outbreak occurred, killing 15,237 people. In 1166, dysentery killed 57 people. Scarlet fever, 218 deaths. 1167, dysentery, 38 people. Diphtheria, 115 people. Smallpox, 327 people. I haven't read out the infectious diseases with too few deaths and too sporadic deaths. If the source of the plague is only destruction by foreign enemies, do you want to say that the Emergency Management Department has missed so many enemy attacks in the past 20 years? On the rostrum, old Sam sneered and burst into laughter. The soldier from the Emergency Management Department almost glared at the rostrum with his chin, but he turned back. The people sitting there are all great magicians, the people in the Magic Council who have the power to make administrative decisions. The legendary mages were not doing anything, and the magicians above level 15 were also busy attacking the legends. The last person who was kicked out to take charge of daily affairs was the rotating committee member of the review committee. Offend them? In the city of Mage, do you still want to hang out? He had no choice but to point his finger at Gretel. He held his head high, stood up straight, and said angrily amidst the gentle laughter around him. Mr. Nordmark, we are not talking about ordinary diseases, but plagues. Of course, the city's existing treatment power is enough to treat ordinary diseases. Only plagues can cause large numbers of deaths. Our emergency management department can contain the source of the plague as long as we prevent all enemies from destroying us. Gretel sighed softly. Sir, it's not that I want to lose face to you, but you said that preventing spies can prevent the plague. For a doctor, it is really intolerable. So, what is the plague? The black-robed mage on the rostrum was refreshed. In the auditorium, several healers from different churches sat upright at the same time. Without looking at them, Gretel turned out of his seat and walked to the whiteboard. Smallpox is a plague. Cholera is a plague. Dysentery is a plague. Black Death is a plague. So, what is the plague itself? Is it a miasma, a poison, a curse from the devil, a punishment from the gods? When he said something, some people responded, some nodded, some shook their heads, some agreed, and some tried to refute. Gretel turned a blind eye and just raised his chin to Aurora at the discussion table and pointed to the documents on the table. From ancient times to the present, various diseases have been named plague by us. They all have a common characteristic: rapid contagion, and many patients with similar symptoms appear in a short period of time, far exceeding the local treatment capacity. Once spread from 10 to 100, causing a lot of pain and death. So I think they should be given a more precise definition. Infectious disease. As for the origin of this infectious disease, I have already explained it in 2 papers submitted in February, on the isolation and treatment of large-scale outbreaks of dysentery and records of observation of Shigella bacilli using a homemade microscope. Aurora raised the 2 papers in response, waved her hand, and continued working. In short, according to my observations and research, dysentery, cholera, tuberculosis, and many other infectious diseases are all caused by certain extremely subtle existences. This kind of organism, I call it bacteria, is widespread in nature and only causes disease in special circumstances. They multiply in the patient's body, are excreted, and then infect other healthy individuals. This process has been described in 2 of my papers. Bacteria are so small that they can only be seen with a special microscope. Sir, if you want to use the same method to deal with the enemy, wave your sword and keep them out, you can't do it? He looked calm and talked eloquently. Across the table, the speaker from the emergency management department had a dull look on his face. His face and eyes looked like a scumbag who picked up a pen in a high-level math class and couldn't keep up with the lecture. If he had a word bubble on his head, it would definitely say, "Who am I? Where am I? What is that guy talking about? These things you said, must have evidence." Yes, evidence. He finally struggled to say a word. Greet got what he wanted, raised his hand, and waved towards the discussion table. Oro, paper. In front of the long table, Aurora Wharton didn't even raise her head, her hands flashed with fluorescent lights, and she was busy acting as a human copy machine. Hearing Gretel's words, Aurora raised her arms and flew over to a paper. The student from the emergency management department was confused. He lowered his head to open the cover and stared at the inner pages. He couldn't turn a page in a long time. Greet glanced at it from a distance and almost laughed out loud. "Dude, you took it down. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews. The new editions recently have been too bleak. If it weren't for the recommendation coming soon, I wouldn't have the courage to write it down. Even if there is no reward, at least some free encouragement. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right?" Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 274. Gretel hesitated for a second, whether to remind the other party in public, as if this would turn into a mockery. Before he could figure it out, a bell rang behind him. The great magician of the protection department who had been dealing with him raised his voice for everyone in the audience to hear. "Please ask Master Gret Nordmark to submit a paper to the review committee. You did it yourself last time. What happened this time? Are you lazy? Gretel cursed and quickly walked over to get it. The paper on the isolation and treatment of dysentery had already been submitted during the previous debate. The only one to be submitted this time was the one on microscopic observation of germs. Thanks to Aurora's speed, she just mentioned the topic of the paper 2 minutes ago. At this moment, 8 papers have been copied. Gretel handed them one by one with both hands. As soon as he handed it to the Archmage of the Protection Department, a majestic and somewhat urgent voice sounded from the direction of the auditorium behind him. The Temple of the God of War requires review of the paper. Huh. Greet slapped his hands. Almost immediately, a familiar, steady voice sounded. The Order of the God of Nature has requested a review of the paper. Hey, Elder, you are so helpful. Gretel sped up the delivery speed a little, preparing to send it to the auditorium after finishing it here. The last paper was delivered, and before turning around, a third voice sounded. In addition to being majestic and noble, there is also a bit of procrastination and unwillingness. The Temple of the Goddess of Spring also requires review of the paper. With his back to the Archbishop and priest, Gretel saw the Archmage of the protection system blinking at him and giving him a fleeting smile. Hey, the Spring Water Temple also asked for papers? Greet blinked and tried to smooth the corners of his mouth. The council encourages magicians to exchange knowledge and share knowledge. As long as you hold a magician badge, you can easily access the submitted papers. Of course it is only an abstract. If you want to read the full text, you have to pay. However, do people other than magicians, such as knights and priests, want to consult the literature? This. Regardless of whether it is Elderwood or others in the Order of the God of Nature, which paper they want to check, all they have to do is tell themselves. Are the God of War Church? If they ask me for a favor, Gretel would definitely not refuse. But, the Temple of the Fountain Goddess? After coming to the Parliament headquarters for so long, Gretel has never had any dealings with the Spring Water Temple. Among the familiar magicians around him, no one has ever heard of them. Seeing the white-robed mage in front of him smiling like this, Greet estimated that they must give him some benefits. At the signal of the white-robed mage, Gretel turned around, walked to the podium, and brought 3 stacks of new papers to the auditorium. The conference hall quickly fell silent. The big guys said nothing, and each lowered his head and turned over the paper. Gretel. This big boss of Black Crow Swamp, you are acting so different. Why don't you turn over a few more pages? Although you should have read all my papers, remember that the one about plague treatment and isolation is the score given by the necromancy school. And Elderwood, I remember when I first started studying bats, I gave you a copy of several papers on microscopy and infectious diseases. The advantage of great magicians and high-level healers reading papers is that others are basically disqualified from speaking. As time passed, Elderwood closed the paper first and said loudly. The Church of the God of Nature preliminarily approves the conclusion of the paper. Further research is needed on the source of the plague and isolation and treatment methods. With him taking the lead, the God of War Temple and the Spring Goddess Temple expressed preliminary approval. The speaker from the Emergency Management Department looked gloomy and lowered his head in silence. The clerk presiding over the hearing waited for a while, and when no one refuted, he rang the bell again. Now, let's give the floor to the head of the City Hall Budget Committee. Greet sat upright instantly. He quickly flipped through the manuscript paper at hand, pulled out a stack, and held it tightly in his hand. The above are all medical issues. If it works, and if it doesn't work. With his knowledge reserve, he can completely confuse the other party. However, next comes the economic issue. Financial problems can be said to be the most helpless and powerless pain for all doctors. No matter how sincere your doctor is, no matter how wonderful your rejuvenation is, no matter how earnestly you explain that this disease is actually not difficult to cure, or that if you leave it alone, it will really kill people, it will not be enough for the patient and the patient's family to say these two words. No money. The pain of watching a patient who could obviously be cured was discharged from the hospital and left on his own. In Greet's previous life, he saw more than one young doctor secretly crying. Even after traveling through time, the problem was not much better. In other words, because the level of productivity in this world is lower and the people are poorer, the word no money becomes more glaring. The city hall can't come up with the money, the council can't come up with the money, the state can't come up with the money. No money, just no money. Moreover, macroeconomic issues are not Greet's strength as a doctor. Greet gripped the manuscript paper tightly and stood ready. The person in charge of the budget committee is indeed an expert in economics. He can do calculations with one hand and a ledger with the other. His thin lips turn quickly, and a long list of numbers comes out from between those two lips. The mustache on his upper lip curled up and down, and for a full quarter of an hour, he didn't even hear him stumble. Gretel only listened for half a minute and could no longer keep up with the other party's speed. As for whether there were any items missing from the accounts reported by the mustache and whether the added up figures were correct, Greet said that he was completely unable to judge. In short, due to last year's war against the Church of the Lord of Glory and the impact of repairing war-damaged armaments this year, Neva City's finances will still be in debt for the next 3 years. After 20 minutes, the mustache tugged, pulling the tie around his neck. Exhaling, he began his concluding remarks. What the review meeting asked before was to build new and larger water supply facilities, rebuild sewers, and build a new infectious disease hospital. He slowed down his speaking speed on the last half of the sentence, and his tone was difficult, as if he was unfamiliar with these new words. After finishing speaking, he paused for a moment before returning to his previous flexible and smooth rhythm. The Budget Committee's assessment is that there are not enough funds available to do this work that has no financial return until the fiscal situation is restored. He bowed deeply around him. The conference hall was depressing. No one applauded or expressed gratitude. Only in the back rows of the committee and the auditorium, some richly dressed but not extraordinary people in the audience looked worried, as if they were afraid that someone would ask them to donate money on the spot. Have you found his flaw? No, I didn't understand at all. Aurora Wharton touched Greet quickly and asked her boss with her eyes. Gretel shook his head silently. Before he could find a chance to speak, the long bell rang again. The clerk held up the wig on his head and turned to Gretel. Now, let's ask Master Nordmark to make a statement. Thank you to all the readers who rewarded me 8 times in one breath, with a starting price of 15,200 coins and countless monthly recommendation votes. The small ones can only sacrifice their lives to reward. I will post a recommended update tomorrow, with a minimum of 5 updates and 3,000 words per chapter. This does not count as rewards for extra updates. From the day after tomorrow, I will start working hard and reward extra updates. Thanks. It's just a reward of 6,500 starting coins from Lee. Thanks to Ashes of Wutong for tipping 5,000 starting coins. Thanks to Zhenzai Yimen and Jiao Mo for the 1,500 starting coins. Thanks to @bookfriend 2017051716593054 for the reward of 500 starting coins. Thanks to @bookfriend 201706061136209990, @bookfriend 2018082617331234 for the reward of 100 starting coins. I risk my life to repay the kindness of all readers. Tomorrow's recommended updates will not be counted as rewards and extra updates. From the day after tomorrow, I will start working hard and reward extra updates. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jiolan 2020. Chapter 275. Greet held the speech tightly and stood up slowly. Bang bang, bang bang, my heart pounded in my chest, my breathing quickened, and my vest began to sweat. It felt like seeing the ambulance door open and the patient being rushed in on the flat car, or like working the second line shift in the middle of the night, sleeping soundly, and the emergency phone bell rang by the bedside. Greet didn't need to feel his own pulse to know that his heartbeat at this time must have reached over 120 beats/min. Oh, tachycardia. Probably sinus. There is no way to challenge opponents in areas where others are good at, it is so uncertain. But, you still have to go. For the kids who are dying at 14, 15, 16 years old. For little Jenny and her mother, poor people who draw water from polluted rivers and will die of illness at some point. For those workers at the bottom whose average life expectancy is appalling. Health matters. Our lives depend on each other. Gretel stood up straight, turned around, and saluted. Then, he took a deep breath and asked a question he had been preparing for a long time. Your Excellency the Archmage, distinguished healers, ladies and gentlemen. Before discussing the City Hall budget, I would like to ask a question. A person, the most ordinary and low-level citizen of Nevis, how many gold coins is he worth? There was a sudden silence in the conference hall. Across the table, the spokesperson of the budget committee curled his lips slightly with disdain on his face. 2 rows behind him, 2 small businessmen were whispering to each other, what's the point in this? That's it, how much are those untouchables worth? 1 or 2 silver coins at most. Not necessarily. If you are killed on the street, you still have to pay a few gold coins. Gretel pretended not to hear. He looked to the left. On the rostrum, the high-ranking mages looked serious, with hints of displeasure. Looking to the right, Elderwood frowned and said in a loud voice. The great God of nature teaches us that everyone is equal before nature. Oh well, the teachings of the God of nature do. The servants of the God of nature never regard themselves as nobler than the common people. Greet's eyes moved slightly and looked next to Elderwood. Under the radiance of the God of war, every warrior is a brother. The Archbishop followed the interface. After a pause, the high-level healer from the Temple of the Spring Goddess spoke reluctantly. The goddess cares for everyone with kindness. Well, at least the clergy of the church still say that everyone is equal before God. Of course, some people are definitely more equal than others, but if several high-level clergymen speak one after another, then at least no one dares to shout in front of them, how much are those untouchables worth? Gretel smiled slightly and bowed to them to express his gratitude. Then, he turned to the rostrum and said calmly. I checked the taxes in Nevis City. In the past 10 years, the annual taxes in Nevis City have fluctuated between 1 million and 1.1 million gold coins. Considering that the prevailing tax rate is about 1/10, that is to say, the value created by the residents of Nevis City every year is approximately between 10 million and 11 million, with an average of 20 to 22 gold coins per person. Considering that a quarter of the residents are boys and girls under the age of 7 and have no ability to work, and about 1/10 are exempted from labor because of their titles and official titles, the value created by each worker every year is 30 to 34 gold coins. You're wrong. A shout came from across the table. Greet turned his head and saw a man he didn't recognize standing in the 5th row opposite, which was the last row. He didn't wear a badge, couldn't feel the magic wave, and looked like he wasn't a knight or a warrior. Maybe he was a businessman? Gretel was still trying to figure out the identity of the other person. The man tugged hard on his waffle collar, his belly trembled, and he spoke eagerly. A water delivery worker can only earn 5 silver coins a month, a female laundry worker can only earn 3.5 silver coins a month, and a small worker in a workshop, who can take care of food and housing, can only earn 3 silver coins a month. You said they earn 30 silver coins a month. To 34 gold coins, this is simply not right. Gretel sighed. What the businessman rebutted was exactly what he wanted to point out next. We all know that without farmers' fields, it is impossible to grow crops, without workers' workshops, It is impossible to produce woolen fabrics, leather, and swords, without fishermen. The fish in the sea will not reach the dining table. Even without dock workers, the goods can't grow long, so they can be loaded and unloaded by themselves. It is human beings, and only human labor can create value. We add up the value of everything a city produces, including wheat, bread, cloth, glassware, etc., and call it the gross national product. The gross national product divided by the number of workers is the per capita output value. The value a worker can create in a lifetime of labor is equal to his value to the city and the country. I think that, as rulers of the city, this is how the council should look at the people. That makes sense. On the rostrum, a great magician with dark circles under his eyes who looked half asleep nodded gently. Gretel was slightly encouraged and continued. If a worker can work for 20 years from the time he has the ability to work, it is equivalent to creating 20 years of value. If he can continue to work for 30 years, it is equivalent to creating 30 years of value. But let us take a look. Look, these poorest and lowest level citizens, how many years can they work? Gretel quickly walked out of his seat and stood in front of the whiteboard next to the podium. Holding the manuscript paper in one hand, he raised the other hand to the whiteboard. The mage's skills shined again and he drew a bar chart on the whiteboard. According to the death data of the past 20 years, the average life expectancy of the nobles, rich, and magicians in the Garden District is 59 years old. Those with middle and high incomes are mainly low-level mages, scholars, and businessmen, with an average life expectancy of 42 years. Low and middle income groups, mainly small traders, craftsmen, low-level clerks, shop assistants, etc., have an average life expectancy of 33 years. As for low-income groups, that is, farmers, water delivery workers, laundry workers, dock workers, unskilled workshop workers, etc., their average lifespan is. Gretel took a deep breath. He looked around, deliberately lengthening the pause between sentences and making eye contact with everyone who looked at him. It wasn't until the silence in the conference hall was sufficiently suppressed that he took out a long breath and drew a shocking column on the whiteboard, only 1/3 of the length of the leftmost column. Minus 22 years old. The entire conference hall shook violently. Then, a buzzing sound rolled up like a tidal wave, flooding every seat. What? So short? Only 22 years old. Even if you give birth to a child at 14 and die at 22, the child will only be 8 years old. That doesn't mean letting the child die. It's fake, right? How could it be so bad? That's right, there are quite a few craftsmen in my shop who are 40 or 50 years old. Greet lowered his eyebrows and stood quietly next to the whiteboard, listening to these messy discussions. When he first entered the death register, he was worried about the lives of those 14, 15, 17, or 18 years old who died tragically early. However, when the statistics were completed and the calculated data was obtained, he couldn't help but take a breath. The situation was worse than he expected. Much worse. 22 years old. The average age of death is only 22 years old. You know, even in old China, before liberation, in such a miserable world, the average lifespan of the people reached 35 years. What is 22 years old? It's hell. He waited quietly for a moment, raised the manuscript paper in his hand, and showed the audience the secret mark on the paper. The great magician of the conjuration system raised his hand, a flash of magic light flashed, and the mark of the thunder tower rose again, shining in the air. Immediately, a louder sound burst out, which lasted for a long time before dissipating. Gretel raised his head and waited. These data were not made up by him. The source of the original records and the calculation process were endorsed by Tolling, so they can withstand investigation. He waited for the surroundings to gradually quiet down, took a step forward, and made a sincere speech to the rostrum. The average age of death is 22 years old. In other words, the time during which a worker can generate maximum value is only 8 years. The 8 years from 15 to 22 years old. Even if they can live for one more year, this means that the time for him to create wealth has been extended from 8 years to 9 years. The wealth of the entire society can be expected to increase by 1/8. Not to mention, more than half of children from poor families die before the age of 6. This means that from the time a baby is conceived, to birth, to raising a baby until he is 6 years old, the social wealth during this period is wasted in vain and does not produce any value. If their conditions can be improved and more children can live to adulthood, this will be a huge asset to society. Among other things, the city of Nevis is still recruiting people to work in the New World. The advance payment for each worker is between 20 and 25 gold coins. Even if one more person lives to be 15 years old, there are still 20 more gold coins. Gretel had been preparing this sentence for a long time. Businessmen, workshop owners, and minor nobles may look at the wages of individual workers, but the Magic Council, as the ruler, must be concerned about the gross national product, or the per capita gross national product. Even if they haven't formed a concrete concept yet, it's easy to explain it to them. To convince the people in power in the city, you only need to ask one question: if 1 gold coin is invested in each person, it can produce 30 gold coins of social wealth. Is it cost effective? He stopped talking for the time being and waited quietly. Opposite the discussion table, in the auditorium, officials, nobles, and businessmen were frothing at the mouth, making gestures, and talking non-stop. On the rostrum, several great magicians discussed hurriedly for a while. The review member of the protection department flicked his fingers, and a grand bell rang immediately in the conference hall. The hall quickly became quiet. The white-robed mage turned to Gretel with a serious expression and a solemn tone. "Mage Gretel Nordmark, you have made a good point. However, if you want to persuade the parliament to increase investment, you need to explain one more point. How much help will increasing this investment have on the lives and health of citizens? In 1842, half of the children of British workers died under the age of 5. The average ages of death for workers, businessmen, and aristocrats in London were 22, 33, and 44 years old respectively. To be honest, I was shocked when I found this data. I knew it was miserable, but I didn't know it was so miserable." Next chapter in 5 minutes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 276. As soon as this question came out, Gretel's heart, which was hanging in mid-air, dropped halfway. The heart rate fluctuated, from 120 beats per minute, which was enough to be assessed as sinus tachycardia, to 70 or 80 beats. After all, he finally brought the rhythm of the hearing under his own control. Who wants to reconcile with you? Who wants to worry about whether any of you made a miscalculation, or whether there is any false accounting? Who wants to tell you whether the budget of the city hall is enough or not? How can you find out more? The jury, and the Magic Council represented by the jury, are the rulers of the city. To convince the Magic Council, you should look at the problem from the council's perspective. As for where the money will come from after convincing the parliament: increase taxes, issue bonds, sell lottery tickets, sell patents, or even copy a few corrupt officials. As the largest violent institution in the country, if Congress wants to accomplish something, there is always a way. Well, thanks to the political classes and political economics courses I have taken since childhood, as well as the news I have listened to for so many years. Greet calmed down and showed a confident smile. After all, the following discussion has entered the field that he is good at, and he is becoming more and more confident. Thank you, Archmage, for your inquiry. Greet bowed slightly and spoke calmly. The establishment of public health facilities is undoubtedly of great help to the lives and health of citizens. To prove this, we can first look at a set of comparative data. In 1165, a cholera outbreak occurred in Nevis, killing 15,237 people. Among them, 3,518 people live in rural areas, 8,115 people live in low-income areas, 2,897 live in low and middle-income areas, 639 live in middle and high-income areas, and 68 live in high-income areas. The poorer you are, the more you die. This naked number makes people's hearts tremble. Even if everyone is equal before the death sickle, more people who can't bear it will be cut down. Just looking at the number of people is not enough. In the silence, on the rostrum, the great magician of the protection department interrupted Gretel with a smile. The number of rich people is small, and the number of deaths is certainly small. If you want to show that it is not easy to die if the conditions are good, you have to get some other evidence. Yes, Gretel nodded calmly. He didn't even need to turn over the manuscript in his hand. He just moved his fingers to reveal the following paragraph and then continued. I divided the urban residential area into 4 parts according to the water supply method. The garden area uses magic arrays and magical arrays to collect water, the residential area where there are dedicated people to deliver water, or there are specialized merchants to obtain water from mountain springs, and the residential area where water is obtained from wells. Areas that draw water from nearby rivers and ditches. It can be seen that these 4 areas basically overlap with the high-income areas, middle to high-income areas, middle-low-income areas, and low-income areas for citizens. He waved at the whiteboard again. Today, a new chart has been added to the whiteboard that has been used as a projection screen and has been erased n times. In 1165, the proportion of residents who died of cholera among residents in various areas of Nevis were 35% in rural areas, 52% in low-income areas, 43% in low and middle-income areas, 38% in upper-middle-income areas, and 12% in high-income areas. Zooming in on the time span to 20 years, the proportions of residents in various regions who died of infectious diseases were 18% in rural areas, 31% in low-income areas, 32% in low and middle-income areas, 21% in middle and high-income areas, and 5% in high-income areas. Among them, the proportions of deaths from intestinal infectious diseases such as dysentery and cholera were 7% in rural areas, 18% in low-income areas, 17% in middle and low-income areas, 9% in middle and high-income areas, and 2% in high-income areas. 3 clusters, 5 colors, and 15 rectangular columns are clearly visible on the whiteboard. Even people who can't remember the data and don't have time to do mental arithmetic can understand what GREET means by just looking at the comparison of column heights. Even just providing clean drinking water can effectively reduce the mortality rate of infectious diseases and significantly reduce the number of deaths. Among them, providing clean drinking water to slums, because slums are densely populated, although the total investment is larger, the per capita input-output ratio will be even more impressive. Oh! The judges were all moved. Several great magicians exchanged glances. The black-robed mage coughed and knocked on the table. Please state what is meant by intestinal infectious disease. Intestinal infectious diseases are infectious diseases in which pathogenic bacteria multiply in the human body and are excreted through the intestines, contaminating the surrounding environment and water sources, and then infecting healthy people through drinking water and food. GREET responded. The currently known intestinal infectious diseases include dysentery, typhoid fever, paratyphoid fever, cholera, etc. I have written about dysentery on the isolation and treatment of large-scale outbreaks of dysentery and records of observing Shigella with a homemade microscope. As for typhoid fever, paratyphoid fever, and cholera, I have written relevant papers and are waiting for review. What about other types of infectious diseases? Other types of infectious diseases do not spread through water bodies, and the chain of infection cannot be cut off by simply providing clean drinking water. However, it is necessary to build specialized infectious disease hospitals, isolate patients and their close contacts in a timely manner, and promptly disinfect the environment where the patients are located. Killing helps prevent the spread of infectious diseases. In this regard, I have related discussion and practice in the article on isolation and treatment of large-scale outbreaks of dysentery. That the black-robed mage wanted to continue asking. On the rostrum, several great magicians coughed at the same time, showing dissatisfaction. The black-robed mage glared back hard. Ask what happened. Ask what's wrong. I'm not from the plague branch. Don't look at every necromancer like a walking plague. If you really want to talk about it, little Gretel is more like the plague branch than me. Don't think I don't know, there are more than a dozen kinds of plague seeds in his laboratory. Gretel almost chuckled. He tried hard to keep a straight face, pretending to be serious and respectful, and waited for the inquiry. Several great magicians glared at each other. Finally, the one from the transformation department got the right to speak, knocked on the table and spoke. Mage Nordmark, do you have any plans for providing clean drinking water? Because of the alchemy workshop, the transmutation department has always been one of the largest engineering teams in the Magic Council. Well, the other engineering team is the conjuration department, and they often work together. However, the conjuration system is good at gathering energy, and constructing various objects and buildings in the void, such as mage mansions and so on, are the characteristics of the conjuration system. When it comes to controlling costs and increasing profits, change is second to none. The great magician asked, obviously worried about the cost. We must know that public health investment is a large investment and slow to produce results. If we want to see a return on investment, we don't know whether it will be enough in more than 10 years. As for the plan that Greet had thrown out before, in terms of urban water supply, it was to build a water plant and water supply pipe network. So far, the bleaching powder used for water purification can only be produced by electrolysis at the Master Tower on the top of Igor Peak. Your Majesty, the great magician calculated the cost of building this set of facilities, and the meditation environment almost collapsed. Counting the money spent on renting the laboratory, we have already spread the water-generating magic circle throughout the city. Gretel smiled. Speaking of which, it was really his own fault. In order to avoid losing money, he had been hasty when writing the plan without careful consideration. For example, in terms of water supply, he casually wrote about the water plant based on his impressions from his previous life. I just discovered this problem a few days ago. By the way, what is the output of a water plant for 500,000 people? Greet had no idea. He rummaged through his memory, rummaged through countless random things, and finally found a piece of news in the corner. A county whose name he had never heard of invested in the construction of a water plant with a total construction scale of 200,000 tons per day. 500,000 residents will have safe drinking water. The total investment is 289 million yuan. Excuse me. Gretel silently crossed out the design of the water plant. He really knows nothing about modern industry, not to mention the amount of investment, 200,000 tons of tap water per day. The combined flow of several rivers near Neva City is that large? Gretel could only settle for the next best thing, and then settle for the next best thing. The plan was discounted and broken, and in the end, it became the most basic version of the Barefoot Doctor's Manual. Regarding providing clean drinking water, I have two different plans. One is more dependent on magic. It can be formed in one go after construction, which saves subsequent labor. The second one does not require magic much, but is more labor intensive. Don't worry, no matter which one is used, it will save money than the water plant. He added the last sentence hastily. The great magician of the Department of Change opened his mouth to ask, but when he heard the last sentence, he couldn't help laughing and stretched out his hand to signal him to continue. Gretel let out a breath, turned a few pages in a row. Plan 1 is to build a reservoir in a clean water source area, divert water through pipelines, and supply drinking water. Based on the calculation of 2 liters of drinking water per person per day, this reservoir only needs 1,000 tons of water supply per day. By building a reservoir and laying pipelines on the mountainside, the natural height of the reservoir can be used to ensure the flow rate. As for engineering, you can rely on magic to build a reservoir, use magic to lay pipes, or use natural magic to create hollow plants to divert water over long distances. There is no need for pipes to enter the house, as long as a pool is built in each gathering area. The pool can be closed and a manual water pump installed to allow residents to fetch water themselves. Of course, the Magic Council will send people to regularly check the water quality and put disinfectant in the pool. Cough. There was a loud cough from the gallery. Gretel quickly turned around and saw Elderwood smiling, not looking like he wanted to stop him at all. Greet pretended not to see other people's faces, faced the rostrum, and continued to state the second plan. The second option is to set up large stoves in slums and provide boiled water for free. Based on the calculation of 1 stove for 1,000 people, up to 500 large stoves can cover the entire city. Because the water supplied is boiled water, the requirements for water source quality can be relaxed, and nearby rivers and water sources that are not seriously polluted can also be used. In addition, water quality in wells in middle and lower income areas must be tested regularly and disinfectants must be put in. Or you can let the servants of the god of nature be responsible for testing. They are always sensitive to whether the water is drinkable. The coughing in the gallery became louder. The member of the change department raised his hand to stop Greet from speaking. With a smile on his face, he extended his hand to the other side. Your Majesty the Great Priest. The next chapter will be here in 5 minutes. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 277. The high-level healer of the Temple of the Spring Goddess Greet now knew that he was the high priest, had a dark face and said nothing. However, a nobleman stood up in the row behind him, bowed to the rostrum, and said respectfully, "Dear great magicians, I have no intention of offending you, but out of my lofty faith, I have to ask. It has always been the great goddess of springs, nourishing her people with clean water. Why is the project of providing drinking water not entrusted to the servants of the goddess? That's of course because, I'm not familiar with you." Greet stood up straight on the spot, looking at his nose, and his mouth, and his heart, resolutely not speaking. He is really not familiar with the Spring Goddess Temple. The Order of the God of Nature is our own home, and the War God Temple has always been a happy cooperation. As for the Spring Goddess Temple, if Priest Donald hadn't left a good impression on him, this temple would have been a complete mess to Gretel. Moreover, the faith of the Spring Goddess is the state religion of the kingdom, and every king level must be crowned by the Pope himself. The royal family and nobles are the natural sphere of influence of the temple. The children of the nobles, especially the second son, youngest son, and daughter, will be sent to the Spring Goddess Temple for education as long as there is no special reason. However, a place can only have one ruler. Relying on the Wang family's spring water temple, it was relegated to the corner in the city of Mage, not attracting attention at all. Greet walked all over the city of Nevis, and finally found a small goddess temple in the corner of the garden area. The area of the entrance square is only slightly larger than the temple of the spring goddess in Heartland City. And more importantly, in the slums, he almost didn't find the drinking water station set up by the temple. Leave it to them. Laugh. In the drinking water supply plan, Gretel deliberately did not consider the spring water temple, and Gretel did it without any psychological pressure. The judges also worked well with him. The great protection mage pretended to cough and pressed his palm down. Viscount Brio, thank you for your opinion. The Nordmark mage's plan is still a preliminary design. If we finally decide to implement it, the council will dispatch more high-level magicians to improve it. Of course, we always welcome priests of the fountain goddess to participate in this health plan. He nodded politely to the high priest. The high priest could only nod in return and remained motionless, as if he didn't hear Gretel wanting to kick them out. Mr. Magician looked cheerful and nodded to Gret. In addition to clean drinking water programs, what else do you think needs to be done together in terms of public health? Well, public health is an interlocking system project. Gret really wanted to tell him everything he had learned in his previous life, or at least throw it away according to the version he had submitted to the council before. But now, he can only pick and choose and pick out the most important ones. More public restrooms. It is prohibited to defecate in the street and dump garbage randomly. Build a dedicated infectious disease hospital. When he said this, the official on the budget committee on the other side of the discussion table turned bitter. Behind the officials, a group of guys who looked like civilian affairs officers and a group of businessmen were all sighing. It was as if Gret wanted to cut a piece of flesh from them every time he talked about a project. Maybe, that's the fact. The review member from the Department of Change happily jotted down a few items and knocked on the table again. For a moment, Gretel's hair stood up. Why are you smiling like this? That smile of yours is so cunning. There are unscrupulous people who want to harm me. He subconsciously clenched the manuscript in his hand and even hid it beside him. The next moment, the great magician smiled with a friendly face, waved for him to sit down, and then waved to the other side of the discussion table. Everyone, do you have any suggestions regarding the cost of public health construction and institution operation? The head of the budget committee was the first to stand up. His face was full of bitterness, his tone was respectful, but he didn't give in even an inch when he spoke. Dear Archmage, we admire the farsightedness of the review committee and thank Master Nordmark for his deep concern for the residents of Nevis. However, according to the budget arrangement of the City Hall, there is really no extra money for expenditure. If the review committee decides to build public health facilities, either additional taxes will be levied or other sources of funding will have to be found. He bowed deeply and sat back down. And to his right, closest to the end of the discussion table and closest to the clerk, stood a thin man. As soon as the man stood up, he subconsciously touched the table and held a flat black cane in his hand. What is this? Gretel couldn't help but pay attention. The man seemed to know something was wrong, and quickly put the cane back. Aurora Warden seized this opportunity and whispered in his ear quietly. Bah, tax dog. Tax, oh, the tax collector. Gretel suddenly realized. I remember Aurora mentioned once that his family was in the wine business, and he probably had suffered losses from tax officials before. I don't know if there are tax collectors in this era. If there are, the losses will be even greater. But Aurora is now a level 5 mage and has become a disciple of the great magician. She should be much better? The tax official bowed to the rostrum and began to speak. As soon as he spoke, Gretel frowned. Unlike what the great magician had told him before, the man had no intention of objecting to Gretel. On the contrary, he spoke endlessly and praised the importance of public health. The gestures were flying, the cheeks were flushed, and the eyes were so bright that they almost glowed. Gret looked at them and instinctively felt uncomfortable. As the tax officer spoke, the topic changed. As the chief tax officer of the City Hall, I think it is easy to obtain more funds. The stove tax in Neva City is now so low that it is almost gone. As long as each person adds 1 copper coin, it is enough to cover this expenditure. What is a stove tax? Gret asked Aurora quietly. Wizard Warden shrugged. Oh, it's equal to the head tax. 2 silver coins per family per year, or, if the population is particularly small, 2 copper coins per person. What? Poll tax? Gretel frowned. 2 silver coins may not be too much, but considering that it is already the end of the year, the sudden need to collect all taxes is likely to interrupt the family's capital chain. He immediately raised his hand. I would like to ask, Mr. Tax Officer, which income bracket are the main residents who have difficulty paying the stove tax? Then there must be many poor people, the tax official replied without thinking. After blurting out, he remembered what was wrong and smiled at Greet. Master, please don't worry. Those untouchables are just cunning in nature and have no respect for the parliament and the kingdom. Whenever you go to collect taxes, he will say that you are poor, have no money, and will only die. Even your family's bread and salted fish can be hidden under the floor, or in the mezzanine of the ceiling, so that you can't take them away even if you want to pay off your debt. But our guys are great too. As long as we are serious, we will definitely be able to collect it. Besides, the money is also used for them. That won't work. Gretel immediately shook his head. His thoughts were racing, and he even thought of several ideas to persuade the other party. Finally, he turned to the rostrum and bowed deeply. Your Excellency, Commissioner, I am opposed to imposing additional stove taxes. The gentleman from the Budget Committee said before that a water delivery worker can only earn 5 silver coins a month, and a female laundry worker can earn 3.5 silver coins a month. On average, there is only 1 copper coin, or 1.5 copper coins per day, that is their daily ration. A copper coin has no impact on the rich, but on the poor, it is equivalent to starving for a day. It may be that on this day, they cannot withstand a disease or escape a speeding carriage. We carry out public health services to help the poorest people, and we must not force them to death before doing so. There was another commotion in the conference hall. Some nodded, some shook their heads, some showed approval, and some frowned. However, the 8th level mage from the medical branch smiled and gave Gretel a thumbs up. Behind the tax officer, in the 4 rows of seats from low to high, a veiled voice suddenly sounded, as if it had been deliberately changed. Then who should step out? Anyway, we don't need these, we won't step out. Don't even dare to risk it? Greet glanced up. I didn't see the person who was speaking, I just saw a group of people above them clapping their hands and thumbing up. There are still people who rely on the law and do not blame others, shouting. That's right. We don't have to drink that water. We don't need to build toilets where we live. Why should we pay for it? Gretel raised an eyebrow. Greet glanced at Elderwood deliberately, but saw that he had a firm look on his face. He clenched his fist hard at himself, then put his palm into the knife and swung it down. At that moment, the elder's sigh from a few days ago sounded in Gretel's ears. Little Greet, if you want to accomplish this, you can't control others and don't dare to take action. There are some people, you just have to show them how powerful they are. Do you want to operate on the person in front of you? Or at least give him a fight? Forget it, I'm too timid to even show my head, and it's boring to argue with him. Greet did not directly protest and drag the person out. Instead, he turned to the rostrum and asked in a loud voice. Your Excellency, Commissioner, do I have the right to make suggestions regarding the funding sources of the organization? If this organization can really be established, you will be the first person in charge. Of course you have the right to make suggestions. The great magician of the change department smiled kindly. Not only do you have the right to make suggestions, but you can also come directly to collect money for projects related to your authority. Of course, the premise is that you can collect it. You really want me to take action? Elderwood, you are right. Gretel took a deep breath, and suddenly his aura was full. Although he is a doctor, he has already become very familiar with quarreling with students, junior doctors, patients, and family members. Now he stood outside the discussion table, and when he opened his mouth, There was unexpectedly silence on the other side. Whoever pollutes it will clean it up. Whoever draws the water will pay. Those workshops along the river, who draw water from the river and dump garbage into the river, all have to pay. Who has any objections? Next update at 12 noon. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 278. Who has an opinion? Everyone has an opinion. Gretel's words were like cold water dripping into a boiling oil pan. The conference hall fell silent and then exploded. Opposite the discussion table, there were 60 or 70 people in 5 rows of seats. Half of them stood up involuntarily, or fell back down after standing halfway. Everyone was furious and spoke out. Why should we pay for it? The river belongs to everyone. Those poor people don't have to pay for drinking water. Why do we need to pay for it? If you don't pour water into the river, where should you pour it? To your house. With wars and ship seizures, business is already so difficult. If we add more taxes, we will have no choice but to go bankrupt. What started out as murmurs gradually turned into shouts and then accusations. Half of the people who are qualified to sit in this conference hall are the city's leading figures. Even businessmen are mostly presidents of major industry guilds, and all of them have a charter from the city hall. President of the Silk Merchant Guild, the president of the Wool Merchant Guild, the president of the Rawhide Merchant Guild, the president of the Fish Merchant Guild, the president of the Hardware Merchant Guild, the president of the Liquor Merchant Guild, the president of the Grocery Merchant Guild. It can be said that these people combined control half of the business in Neva City and more than half of the tax revenue. If they join forces to protest, even the Magic Council will seriously consider their opinions. The magician is aloof. After all, it is impossible to do business in person, so he must rely on others. It's not that force cannot be used, but it is the ultimate resort. If you can't use it as little as possible. If it were a formal order issued by the Parliament, these people might not dare to cause trouble. However, public health charges are obviously still in the discussion stage. If we don't shout out and make a fuss, how long will it take? By the time the review meeting is closed to discuss with that little mage, it will be too late. With their status, they can't even enter the conference room door. The group of people became more noisy and violent. Greet turned to look at the rostrum. The great magician of the transformation department had a smile on his face and raised his chin at him, indicating that he would find a solution on his own. Obviously, the Parliament does not want to use physical, magic, persuasion on this matter. Gretel's eyes slowly scanned the opposite side. On the 5 raised rows of seats, there are about a dozen mage badges flashing, the lowest ones are 1 or 2, and the highest ones are 6 or 7. And the way those magicians looked at him was not all kind. Gretel once heard Aurora say that many low-level or mid-level mages who are older and have no hope of advancement will start their own business or simply be employed by merchants. Earning more money will at least lead a comfortable life, or you can save money for future generations to learn magic. Of course, there are also many magicians who receive technical guidance fees from their workshops through their disciples or family members to provide guidance or protection. Aurora once complained to him like this. How can you do business in Nevis without a backend? Tisk. The matter of collecting money obviously affects the interests of many people. What's even more troublesome is that Gretel doesn't know who is behind these people, which school they belong to, which great magician. He couldn't even start with who are our friends and who are our enemies. This is the primary question at the moment. But so what? The cards I can play are far from exhausted. Gretel simply stood still. He raised his head, crossed his arms, and tilted his chin slightly to the side, showing a "you make trouble, I'll watch you make trouble" attitude. To be honest, it's not that he can't show off this air, it's just that he rarely used it in the past. When the emergency department is busy, One person has to be used as 3 people. Where is the time to go against the troublemakers? After watching indifferently for a few minutes, the protests on the other side grew from small to loud, from gentle to intense, and then gradually declined from the peak. Gretel lowered his head and flipped through the manuscript a few times, took out a page, held it in his hand, and walked out of his seat slowly. Your Excellencies, great magicians, distinguished healers, ladies and gentlemen. When I was investigating the city's drinking water problem, I once walked to a river. Along the river bank, from upstream to downstream, the workshops are roughly arranged like this of cheese shop, woolen shop, wine shop, dyeing shop, tanning workshop, rawhide workshop, silk cloth workshop, canvas workshop, slaughterhouse, pig farm. Gretel lowered his eyes slightly, reading along the paper one by one. Some people on the opposite side were indifferent, some looked slightly nervous, and some whispered. He was talking about Smith River. I know that river, but it stinks. When I go there, I always turn around 2 streets away. What does this guy want to say? I have a workshop right there. Greet finished reading slowly. Then, he shook hands with the manuscript paper, raised his head, and smiled half-heartedly. I just don't understand why winemakers dare to take water from the river where the cheese merchants dump their waste. Have you never felt that the taste of wine is wrong? Dyeing workshop owners, when you failed to dye cloth, never thought that it was because the river water upstream was polluted? Slaughterhouse people, when you use river water to wash beef and pork, don't you really think that the water you use comes from upstream where tanning waste and wine dregs have been poured? When you eat this kind of meat into a dish, don't you feel stomach discomfort? And pig farmers, I don't even want to ask you how many pigs die every year. Why, if people drink such dirty river water, they will die of illness, but pigs will not die of illness if they drink it. Even if it is to make more money for yourself, I advise you not to pour anything into it and keep the river water clean. He called a name, and there was a person opposite with a dark face. After reviewing the 17 or 8 workshops, the merchants all looked ugly and glared at each other. Looking at it like that, if we weren't in the conference hall, we would have started a quarrel on the spot. The last batch of silk and satin was dyed with flowers, and it was all because of you. No wonder the batch of wine from last month was sour. It's all you. It's all you. Make me pay for it? Hundreds of pigs. Even the great magicians on the podium looked unhappy. The faces of the nobles in the auditorium were even more clouded. They don't have to live in the slums or go to the river. They can live in the wizard's tower every day, or have fun in the garden area or in their own castle. However, wine needs to be drunk, meat needs to be eaten, clothes need to be worn, cheese and fruit snacks are needed, everything is indispensable. When I think about the food I eat and the silk, wool and leather I wear, they are made with such dirty water. Vomit. Gretel smiled triumphantly. He turned to the rostrum, bowed slightly, and said in a brisk tone, Your Excellencies, for our safety and health, I suggest that these workshops be re-evaluated and a group of shops with good production conditions be selected. The production water should be kept clean, the workshop conditions are good, and the hygiene standards are passed. The Parliament can issue a badge or a bronze medal for certification. It is a safe product and a safe product for adults to choose from. Of course, in today's world, doing business is not easy. If you don't want to apply for certification or are unwilling to modify your production environment, we don't have to force it. After all, public health agencies have limited manpower, and it is indeed time-consuming and labor-intensive to conduct assessments one by one. We adhere to the principles of voluntary application and freedom of production. However, we will never issue certification to shops and workshops that do not apply for certification or fail to pass the assessment. Not issued. Put lightly. The faces of the businessmen in the rear seats turned darker. As a leader of a chamber of commerce, it is impossible not to interact with the upper-class society. By then, other people's products will have received parliamentary certification, but what's yours? How dirty your house is. Don't touch me. Okay, your stuff will instantly become inferior. Magicians, nobles, priests, officials, as long as one person rejects your family, the entire upper-class society will close the door to your family. This little magician has such a dirty heart. And there are people supporting him. On the rostrum, 6 or 7 of the 8 review members representing the 8 schools of thought in the parliament showed approval. The only one whose expression is unclear is the skeletal face of the necromancer. That's a good idea. On the rostrum, the great magician of the transformation department nodded directly. He smiled and stroked his beard. Little Greet, how do you think the certification standards should be set up? Just like water, Gretel thought for a while. First we establish a standard, such as bacterial content, such as pollutant levels. If water is drawn from a river, as long as the river water quality monitoring fails, all businesses that draw water will be judged as unqualified. If someone specially sends someone to collect water from the upstream water source, then test the water they send into the workshop to prevent the water source from being clean but being contaminated on the road or in the workshop. What if the council supplied water? Finally someone couldn't help shouting. Gretel tilted his head and sighed. The parliament cannot supply water for the time being. There is no budget and no investment. We have to save a little here and a little there. It is already very difficult to provide drinking water to the urban poor. The production water consumption is too large and we cannot afford it. You said you have no money, spread your hands. On the rostrum, the great magician of the transformation department almost laughed out loud. Gretel is really good at cheating. Last time, I struggled with the review meeting for 3750 contribution points, but in the end I really didn't lose a penny. This time, for the sake of public health, it is hard for him to think of this method to get money from businessmen. The presidents of the Chamber of Commerce were whispering among themselves and discussing quickly. Before the discussion could come out, a clear and high-pitched female voice sounded loudly in the auditorium. Your Excellency, Commissioner. The Viscounty of Roche is willing to donate 2,000 gold coins to help the Parliament establish a water purification project. It is also hoped that after the completion of the project, the territory's properties in Neva City can be prioritized for evaluation. Greet turned back. In the second row of the auditorium, the female knight Selena stood tall and straight, with bright eyes. Beauty, no, boss, thank you for your help. That sentence opened the floodgates of donations. Soon, the merchants began to shout one after another. I'll donate 1,000 gold coins. I'll donate 500. No, 800. I'll donate 1,500. I'll go back and mobilize the Brewing Guild to make unified donations. Gretel raised his eyebrows towards the podium. How much money residents can make from using water needs to be paid back. Selling industrial water is the way to go. From 12 o'clock last night to now, there have been 6 rewards, starting with 6,900 coins. Yesterday there were 71 monthly votes and 511 recommended votes. You guys love me so much. Today at 12 noon and 8 p.m., 3,000 words each. I will try my best to write another chapter after 8 o'clock. Try to update 6 chapters today. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, it's all 6,000 words. Keep asking for monthly votes, recommendation votes, and book reviews. Thanks. It's just a reward of 6,500 starting coins from Lee. Thanks to @ONI who loves to play roller coasters for the reward of 1,500 starting coins. Thanks to @Taoist Luhi for the reward of 200 starting coins. Thanks to @Dark Mercenary from Another World Janed for the reward of 200 book coins. Thanks to @Bookfriend 20210301106564967494, At bookfriend 2018082617331234 for the 100 starting coins reward. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 279. The businessman instantly made a 180-degree turn. Just now, I was still pushing back and forth, but in an instant, I was already rushing to donate money. You have 1,000, he has 800, and he has 1,500. If it were not in the conference hall, the wallets, money bags, and jingling gold coins would have rained down. Gretel was not at all proud. With many years of experience as an emergency doctor, he has become quite skilled at judging people with high eyebrows and low eyes. Although the businessmen in front of them took out their money happily, when they looked back or lowered their heads, a little anger and gloom would occasionally leak out from the corners of their brows and eyes. You can even think about it with your knees. Who can be happy if someone is forcing you to pay? Even when he was asked to pay compensation by the review committee, when he had to spend extra money to build a high-level mage tower, including when entering data using a tower spirit, he resisted in every possible way and did not want to pay a penny. It's okay to simply hold a grudge against him. Just be afraid, the wool comes from the sheep, and they ask the businessmen to pay, and the businessmen will turn around and deduct the wages of the workers, or simply fire a few. In the end, even before public health construction started, a large number of workers were already implicated and more social problems were caused. You still have to give them a sweet date. Of course, before giving Tianzao a big stick, he should try to hit him as hard as possible. Gretel thought. He lowered his head silently amid the noise and began to flip through the information in his hand. 1 page, 2 pages. Following his actions, the noise in the conference hall gradually subsided, and a tense silence gradually accumulated. Gretel turned to the pages he wanted. When he finished reading, he looked up and saw the 20 or 30 people opposite him stretching their necks and staring directly at his manuscript paper. This. Whether you read it or not, I'm going to talk about all this, it's useless to see it in advance. Gretel cursed and turned to the podium. Hey, although it's a bit deceptive, you still have to ask for what you need to ask for. In addition to using clean water sources in production, companies, workshops, and shops that want to be certified, should also abide by some regulations. First of all, garbage cannot be thrown away casually, and wastewater must be discharged uniformly. Why? Why? Several voices on the other side shouted together. The fattest and strongest one shouted especially loudly. Our slaughterhouse produces so many internal organs a day. If we don't throw them into the river, what should we do? Oh, it turns out they are killing pigs and sheep. No wonder he's so fat. His coat has been made as big as possible, but it can't cover the bulging muscles on his arms. Greet glanced at the other party with pity. If you don't want it, give it to me. I'll send someone to drag it away. What? The butcher was stunned for a moment. I want to say I'll give it to you, but I'm a little unwilling to do so. I always feel that Greet is hiding a trap somewhere. I want to say I'll handle it myself, but Greet's words hold me back, but I can't say it out. While he was struggling, Gretel turned his face and smiled at the auditorium. Master Bishop, how about I hire someone to cook these offal and sell it to the temple? After all, it is meat, which can fill the stomach, and can also improve the soldiers' night blindness, so that they can see things at night. Don't worry, I only charge the cost price. The archbishop smiled and nodded. The owner of the slaughterhouse immediately straightened his eyes, leaned forward, and shouted so loud that he almost broke his voice. Wait. It's hard to clean up the internal organs. If they can't be cleaned, they can't be eaten. What a shame, I know how to do it, Gretel shrugged. I'm a healer. I've dealt with everything from the heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and intestines. It's easy to hire a few people to teach them how to do it. At most, it's a little difficult to clean the intestines. At worst, I have to use soda ash, and I don't lack that stuff. Thunder Tower produces water purification tablets, and there is caustic soda in the byproduct. After a little tossing, it becomes soda ash. The owner of the slaughterhouse was glistening with oil and sweat. At the age of 12, he came to the city from the countryside to work as an apprentice. He started as a small laborer carrying buckets and boiling water, and eventually became the president of the slaughtering guild. One sword at a time, one pig and one sheep, to achieve today's status. When dealing with people, we believe that money is earned and saved. We will not hire anyone who can't be hired, and we will do the work ourselves if we can do it ourselves. To this day, he is still in the shop early in the morning, killing pigs, bleeding them, blanching them, cutting them into pieces, and working with his men. Such a person has a ready-made path in front of him, but it is simply more uncomfortable than cutting out his flesh to prevent him from making money. Seeing that Greed had finalized a deal with just a few words, he stretched his neck against the back of the chair in front of him. If he hadn't been in the last row, he would have jumped down and hugged Greed's thigh. Master Mage, Master Healer, hire me. You have to hire people for everything, just leave it to me. I will sell it at whatever price you want. I will never make an extra point over there at the Temple of the God of War. Look, isn't it good to be so obedient earlier? Greed sighed contentedly and looked at the auditorium again. The Archbishop of the God of War Temple smiled slightly and raised his hand to Gretel. It's up to you. I just want something. The price is half the price of meat. Those boys in the temple can eat whatever they want. Except for knights, ordinary temple guards cannot eat meat every day. The temple is also very happy to be able to get cheap, stable, and delicious animal offal. Besides, little Greed's favor has not yet been repaid. Last time, the 20 priest apprentices were returned in only 2 days. Master. You hire me. You will get half of the income from this business, no, 80%. 80%. 90% is the head office. I still have to pay the wages to the clerk. It's cost-effective to give them all. Are the thighs of the Temple of the God of War something you can hug if you want to? Also, once you learn how to cook offal, it's your own business. Gretel pursed her lips and smiled, but did not answer the question. To his left, Aurora raised her head from the manuscript and scolded him. Okay, does the boss need you some money? The boss even has his own mage tower. Well, although he doesn't have it yet, looking at the meeting today, he will get it soon. Instead of thinking about giving money, why don't you think carefully about what the boss really needs? Yes. The owner of the slaughterhouse nodded and bowed. Master Mage, don't worry, I will listen to whatever you say. Don't throw away the internal organs, don't pour the sewage, then where should we dump it? That's right, that's why you're obedient. Greed smiled at him and pressed his palm down to signal him to calm down. We'll talk about your business later. Dear members, let me explain here that water bodies with too much garbage and feces are especially conducive to bacterial reproduction. In the past 2 months, when I was taking water samples for testing throughout the city, it was found that the bacterial content in sewage ditches with a lot of garbage was particularly high. From this, I believe that in order to improve the level of urban sanitation, garbage and feces must be dumped uniformly, sewage discharged uniformly, and processed through sedimentation, filtration, and plant absorption. If you need it, I can provide my experimental records to prove the necessity of banning littering and unified treatment of wastewater. The great magicians discussed in low voices for a while. Then, the great magician of the change department coughed and spoke on behalf of everyone. The experimental records can be submitted later. Master Nordmark, go on, tell me what else needs to be done. Yes, oops, this is such a comfortable turn of phrase. Greet got what he wanted, cleared his throat, and glanced at the businessmen opposite. We establish public health services to improve the health of citizens and enhance their well-being. For this reason, the costs paid by businesses must not be passed on by depriving employees, laying off workers, or raising the prices of people's daily necessities. This is putting the cart before the horse and completely goes against the original intention of the Parliament and must be strictly prohibited. There was another chaos on the seat opposite. However, this time, Gretel did not allow them to protest loudly, but instead raised his voice. Are the colleagues from the Liquor Association here? Here you are. An old man stood up in the second to last row. He had a sallow face and a big belly. He pressed his right ribs with one hand intentionally or unintentionally. Gretel just glanced at him and wanted to go over and roll his eyelids. Old man, do you have cirrhosis of the liver? He suppressed his medical instinct, raised his face, and looked directly at the other person. His voice was neither urgent nor slow, with a smile on his lips. Do you make your own wine? Do you grow grapes? Do you know how to prevent grapes from getting sick? Do you want to know how to prevent wine from becoming sour, and how to control the temperature and time of steaming malt when brewing beer? He asked a question, the old man nodded, asked another question, and nodded again. After asking a series of questions, the old man's waist had already bent to 45 degrees, and he had to kneel down and hug his thighs. Gretel turned his head to the left. After taking 2 steps out, I looked back at him. By the way, you'd better find a high-level healer, take a look at your liver. The wine merchant nodded. Gretel smiled at him and scanned the seats opposite him from left to right. Salt merchants here, would you like to know how to purify coarse salt efficiently and what the purified impurities can be used for? Blacksmiths Guild, if there is one, would you like to know how to smelt iron on a large scale and how to ensure that the smelted iron can be used? Grocers, let's call them grocers. Is anyone interested in a way to mass-produce sulfuric acid? He spoke casually, and the sound of heavy breathing on the seat opposite became more and more frequent. Businessmen, you looked at me and I looked at you, my eyes began to turn red. If they didn't belong to different industries, they would have gotten into a ball on the spot. That's right. These advanced technologies are both profits and weapons. Whoever has them in their hands will be able to stand out among their peers. The Magic Council is the representative of this world's advanced technology, holding the most powerful weapon in its hands. Gretel turned to face the podium and bowed slightly again. Providing employment, providing rich prices, suitable products, and protecting the environment are all social responsibilities that a shop or workshop cannot shirk. I think the Magic Council should choose those stores that perform well in terms of social responsibility and prioritize cooperation with them, or provide technical guidance. The last few words dragged on long and heavy. There was silence for a moment, and then, bang, 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 the great magician of the transformation department smiled and clapped his hands. Several other committee members also applauded. Others quickly followed, and within a short while, there was a round of applause from the rostrum, across the discussion table, and in the auditorium. Greet smiled and bowed in 3 directions. He waited patiently for about half a minute, then raised his hands and pressed down gently. Silence returned to the conference hall. Greet turned to the opposite side of the discussion table, put his hands behind his back, and smiled calmly. Now, which Chamber of Commerce and Workshop is unwilling to abide by the rules of the Parliament? Thank you readers for your rewards, monthly votes and recommendation votes. I will try my best to write another update tonight. I won't sleep until I finish writing. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, 6,000 words a day. Please give me monthly votes, recommend votes, book reviews, and all kinds of things. Thanks to @GN Aslan for the 1500 starting coins. Thanks to @bookfriend 20210603194334302, was it an adverb just now for the reward of 200 starting coins? Thanks to @ChenDui Online, @bookfriends 202004251016087747, @Guchengkuang for the 100 starting coins reward. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jialan 2020. Chapter 280. This hearing ended with Greet's victory. At the end of the meeting, when the great magician from the Department of Protection announced the establishment of the Department of Public Health on behalf of the review committee, the applause from the audience was like a storm. The leaders of the commercial guilds applauded vigorously. There is no way, greed not only controls their profits, but also their life and death. If this little magician is not happy, label them as lack of social responsibility, or postpone the evaluation of safe products and reliable products by 2 months, so that their competitors can take advantage of them first. To certification. Then everyone should stop living. Therefore, even if they were scolded before, everyone still had to stand up and support Gretel diligently. Whether they were named by Gretel and saw the Kotai strip right in front of them, or those who were not named or pointed in the direction, they were all digging for cracks and asking around. Which school does this Nordmark mage belong to? Who is the teacher? Where is home? Are there any relatives in Nevis? Well, how can I give him a gift? Greet didn't know that one day or a certain period of time in the future, people might come to give gifts in a steady stream. At this moment, he was being carried by the magicians of the jury and running towards Igor Peak. The great magicians even summoned a magic carriage and ran as fast as they could, as if they were afraid of being blocked in the middle of the road. It's not necessary. Gretel looked around. They were so anxious to drag him away without even saying a few words. He has not said hello to Elderwood, nor has he gone to say thank you to the Archbishop of the Ares Temple. Yes, there is also the female knight. Halfway through the last physical examination in the castle, he was taken away by Archmage Carlyle and let go alive. Elderwood completed the follow-up work for him. The female knight even helped him today. It's necessary, old Sam followed him closely, never leaving. The great magician of the protection department laughed beside him. If I don't drag you away, I don't know how many families will come to rob you. Not to mention the natural gods cult, I think the Archbishop of the Ares Temple wants to arrest you and hide you. Hey, he patted the dead man in the front seat. Spirit mage. Don't you agree? That's right, the black-robed mage looked back at Gretel greedily. The little guy is really good. I didn't expect that you could make those businessmen bow their heads without our help. Hey, old Sam, let's discuss how about letting him come to Black Crow Swamp. You can make whatever conditions you have. Roll. The review committee member of the Plastic Energy Department snorted fiercely. Gretel lowered his head and smiled. He has seen this kind of exchange countless times, and he was frightened at first, fearing that the great magicians would start fighting, and after seeing too many of them, he just thought they were exchanging feelings. On the other hand, the old man from the change department shook his head and sighed. Little Gretel, you are in big trouble. Do you understand all those awful, grapes, wine, salt, iron smelting, and sulfuric acid? So many guilds are coming to our door, we have to, someone is out to provide guidance. Greet blinked and laughed. Old Sam glared at him hard. You still have the heart to laugh. Even if they are just businessmen, the council can't cheat their money in vain. When their donations arrive, you can't guide everyone, at least 2 or 3, right? If there is anything you don't understand, please tell me immediately and we will set up the project to find someone to study it. How? But, I really know all this, at least I know the direction. I know the general idea. Hand it over. Gretel stretched out his hand confidently. With his palm facing up, he stretched it out in front of old Sam's eyes. He waved it once, twice, and 3 times. We agreed that if the project is approved, I will be given the Mage Tower. Where is my tower? Also, if the project is approved, the money for renting the tower spirit will be included in the research funds and will be waived for me. Bring me the approval slip. I'll go get the loan department right off. The judges looked at each other, and for a moment, they laughed out loud one after another. The great magician of the conjuration system knocked on the wall of the carriage, and the magic carriage immediately turned around. The wheels rolled, and soon, the group stood together at the foot of the mountain, overlooking the location of Master Gretel's tower. The more Greet looked, the more satisfied he became. Even though the foundation of the Mage Tower had just been laid, it didn't stop him from curling up the corners of his mouth. This Mage Tower is really perfect everywhere. The location of the Mage Tower was chosen by him himself. According to the requirements of the P4 laboratory, the tower should be set up in the downwind direction of the city and downstream of the river to avoid endangering the city in the event of leakage. However, the southwest wind prevails in Nevis all year round, and the warm wind hits Igor Peak, turning into rain and condensing into streams. If you insist on moving it to the downwind direction, it will be equivalent to running upstream of the city. Greet chose for a long time and had to place it in the southeast of the city, separated from the city by a ridge. The transportation is quite convenient, just over the hill is the train station. Cut a path in the bushes and pave it with stones, or use fossils to mud and turn mud to stone to roll back and forth twice. The magic horse will be on its way and it will take less than half an hour to cross the mountains. There is a separate stream flowing down from the top of the mountain, passing near the Mage Tower, and winding into the sea, making it convenient for Gretel to set up a breeding farm nearby and raise some experimental animals. Pollution caused by breeding can be easily solved by digging a sedimentation tank, a filter tank, and a water purification solution. How's it going? Are you relieved now? Gretel was carried onto the phantom pony and descended to the foot of the mountain, standing next to the foundation of the Mage Tower. He walked happily around the foundation, sometimes standing up, sometimes squatting, sometimes touching the ground. Then, returning to the committee members, the first question was asked. Is the ground made of a single stone? He didn't see such a big stone when he came last time. And it is completely integrated, and you can't see any gaps. Is it a whole stone or? Otherwise, the old man from the transformation department glared at him. Who said it must be waterproof and cannot leak, otherwise it will cause big trouble. We used a magic circle to turn fossils into mud, and then turn the mud into stone. The bottom 2 floors are only 9 meters, and the foundation it's under 15 meters. Oh, thank you very much, Greet bowed quickly. The stone underfoot has a dense structure and fine texture. It looks a bit like obsidian, maybe basalt. Anyway, it looks very strong and impervious to water. The old magician snorted and pulled him aside. No need to thank you, just don't cause us any trouble in the future. Boy, see clearly, this is an advanced version of turning mud into stone. It's not the same as the ordinary version, and the shaped stone is also different. Start. At the finger, the mud was flowing beside him, moving closer. It stood up, deformed, and solidified, and soon, a dark, smooth stone wall stood in front of Gretel's eyes. There was powder falling from the old man's fingers. Gretel knelt down and looked. Sand, lime, water, wait. The fossils are turned into mud to make cement walls. Can we change the formula? The update is over. There are only 2,000 words in this chapter tonight. I really can't write it anymore. I'm exhausted. I've finished 6 chapters today. Starting tomorrow, for 5 consecutive days, 6,000 words a day. I beg readers for monthly votes, recommendation votes, book reviews, anything. Thanks to @Feeling Fog for the reward of 20,000 starting coins. Thanks to @Lofsway for the 1,500 starting coin reward. Thanks to @BookFriend 202108071735240024 for the reward of 500 starting coins. Thanks to @Kingping's Highway for the 200 starting coins.